it's Sayback here. Welcome back to my podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about another body system. Now, last year I made a podcast about a body system called the digestive system. And this time of year I'm making a podcast about a different one. And the one I'm making the podcast about today is the circulatory system. Now, just to refresh our minds, let's talk about what a body system, also known as an organ system, is. An organ system or a body system is basically a group of organs which work together to do one specific job or task to help your body function properly. An example is the digestive system. If you listen to my podcast about the digestive system, then you would know that the digestive system's job is to digest food and absorb the nutrients. So, if every body system has a lot of organs in it and each organ has a function, what does the circulatory system do and how does it help us? Well, we're going to be answering exactly that question in this podcast today. So let's dive in. First of all, what is the circulatory system's job and what organs is it made of? Well, the circulatory system's job is to pump blood all around the body. This is really important because this blood is carrying a lot of nutrients, vitamins, carbohydrates, and even oxygen. And once the blood transports this around the body to other organs, then, that helps the organs function properly. Now, every organ needs these nutrients, oxygen, etc., to function properly. And that's the job of the circulatory system, to transport it. Now, what's the circulatory system made of, you ask? Well, the circulatory system is made up of a mix of organs and tissues. So, the organs that make up the circulatory system are the blood vessels and the heart. Obviously, you've heard of these, but we're going to learn about them in a lot more depth. Now, the circulatory system is also made of a very vital tissue, which is the blood. So, now that we know the organs and the tissues that the circulatory system is made of, let's find out what each of them do and how they work together to, transport all of these nutrients and vitamins around the body to organs which need them. So, the first component of the organ system we're going to start with is the blood. The blood is a liquid tissue. And by liquid tissue, I do not mean a tissue which is dissolved in water. Not the tissues that you would sneeze into. I mean the tissues inside your body. Now, those tissues aren't made of paper or whatever real tissues are made of. They're made of cells. Cells are the tiniest thing that you could find in your human body, kind of like atoms, just for your body. And, these tissues are made up of those cells, and the tissues then make organs. Now, the blood doesn't make any organ because the blood's a tissue which has its own very important job. And I'm going to talk about that right now. So, the blood's job is to flow through the blood vessels and capillaries, which are basically just smaller blood vessels, which we'll cover in just a minute. And it transports all of these nutrients, vitamins, and carbohydrates, as well as oxygen, around the body. Now, you know how each organ system is made up of a lot of different organs? Well, same goes for the blood, except it's not made of organs. It's made up of different components. So, I'm going to talk about these 4 components that the blood is made of. Now, listen up, because this is really interesting. Now, if you've ever, fallen over or scratched your knee, you probably might have seen some blood. And though it's really, really important for the human body, it is still made up of different things. The first thing is plasma. Plasma makes up 55% of the blood. And this is kind of like a yellowish liquid which helps the blood flow. This is what makes the blood, or a tissue, a liquid tissue. Now, most tissues aren't liquid, but blood is one of the only liquid tissues in your body, and that's all thanks to plasma, which makes up just a bit over half of your blood. But I'm pretty sure you noticed that I said plasma makes up more than half of your blood, but is a yellowish colour. Now, this doesn't make any sense because blood is red and plasma makes up more than half of the blood. So then, how isn't it yellow? Well, the red bit is all thanks to a hemoglobin. Now, of course, a hemoglobin is not a part of blood, but it is a part of a component of blood. And that component is a cell. To be precise, a red blood cell. Now, you've probably heard about red blood cells, and you've probably heard your teachers say that this is what makes up blood. But let's go a little bit more into depth into red blood cells. Red blood cells have a very unique shape, which is very different from other cells. Unlike other cells, which are kind of just like a disc, red blood cells have a little dip right in the middle, kind of like a jam-filled donut. The red blood cells are made in the bone marrow, and they, unlike other cells, have another very unique thing apart from the dip in the middle. But before talking about the unique thing that they do have, let's talk about the common thing that they don't. Most cells have a brain, kind of, which controls the DNA of the cell, and that's called a nucleus. It's basically the brain of the cell. Now, the nucleus is probably present in all cells in the body except red blood cells. Instead of a nucleus, red blood cells have a hemoglobin. A hemoglobin is kind of like a pocket in your red blood cell to contain all of the things that you need to transport around the body. So basically, the hemoglobin contains the things that you would need to carry around the body, and it also does another very special thing. The hemoglobin is what makes the red blood cells red and officially gives it their name. That's why red blood cells are called red blood cells, because of the hemoglobin. And that's also why blood is red. Now, the next component of blood is white blood cells. White blood cells make from 0.7% to 1% of the blood. And if I didn't mention, red blood cells make from 40 to 45% of blood. Now, back to the white blood cells. White blood cells are, well, they make up very less of the blood. And as you might have guessed, they are white. Now, the job of the white blood cells is not to help blood flow or to help store the things that we need to transport around the body, but it's actually to protect your body. White blood cells are part of your immune system, and they basically protect you from other diseases or viruses which may try to invade your body. White blood cells are also made in the bone marrow along with red blood cells, and they are basically kind of like your own army inside your body to help you fight terrible bacteria and diseases. And now, the fourth and last component of blood, which makes up less than 1% of it, platelets. Now, whenever you scrape your knee or get a cut, you might notice this black thing which starts to form on your skin. Well, those are platelets. Platelets are tiny broken up cells which, well, whenever you get a cut, they have this alert and they race to wherever your cut is and they form a layer of protection over it to stop excess blood from going out of your body. Then, while the skin forms under your little protective layer that the platelets caused, the platelets will start to blacken because of the exposure to oxygen. And then, once the layer of skin is underneath the platelet's little shell, it'll fall off and it'll be as good as new. Just look at how fascinating it is. Like, your own body has an army, your body cells have a brain, and your own body can protect you from viruses. Isn't that just so fascinating, especially when you learn about it? Now, we've learned about the tissue that's very, very important for the circulatory system, but now let's talk about an actual organ. Or should I say 2 organs? Now, I know I said that blood vessels are 1 organ, but there are kind of 2, because blood vessels are arteries and veins. Arteries are what carry blood, and so do veins, but there's a difference. And I'll come to that in just a second. But first, I have to explain what the job of blood vessels is. Now, the blood vessel's job is to hold the blood inside them and transport it. Now, the blood transports the nutrients and vitamins and carbohydrates. But what transports the blood? Well, of course, it's the arteries and veins. Now, that's the job of the blood vessels, but what are the arteries and veins? Well, and also what's the difference? So, the difference between the arteries and the veins are that arteries carry red blood and veins carry blue blood. Now, no, you're not a chameleon, you don't have blue blood inside you, but in scientific charts, to differentiate veins and arteries, scientists say that the veins carry blue blood as it is deoxygenated. Now, I'll explain that in just a bit, but the reason that scientists do this is because if you just take a look at your wrist, you just might see that you can see some of your veins right there, and they look a bit greenish blue. So this gave the scientists the idea that on medical charts and diagrams, they would make the veins have blue blood inside them and the arteries have red blood inside them. Now, the reason that your blood looks like this is because arteries carry oxygenated blood. This means that the blood is carrying oxygen. And basically, think of it like this. Your blood is in your heart and it has oxygen in it. So then the heart says, okay, you have to go to the arteries, and it pumps it through the arteries. Then the arteries will take the blood to organs. The blood will then drop off the oxygen, vitamins, carbohydrates, and then, here's the fascinating part, it'll go around the body and give all the organs what they need, and then it'll come right back up to the heart through the veins. Now, once the blood no longer has oxygen in it, it goes to the veins. And the veins carry what is called deoxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood then goes back to the heart and gets oxygen and then goes back through the arteries. Now, I'll explain how that happens in the heart in just a bit. But first, let's talk a little bit more about the arteries and the veins. To make it clear, arteries carry blood away from the heart, and the veins carry blood to the heart. Kind of like your own train system inside your body. The train, or the arteries, carry the blood to the organs which need the oxygen. The blood then drops off the oxygen and then goes on the next train, which is the veins. The veins then take all of the blood back to the heart to get more oxygen. Okay, so here's a question. You might have heard me say the word capillaries a lot when I was talking about the blood, and as well as when I was talking about the definition of the blood vessels and what they do, and what the circulatory system does for your body. Now, here's what capillaries are. Capillaries are basically really tiny blood vessels which help the blood get through really tight spaces. And this is so that the blood reaches every single tiny organ all around the body so that your body can function healthily and happily. So that's what capillaries are. But now you might be wondering, well, there's something called gravity. So if gravity exists, how does it prevent blood, which is going up to the heart from the legs, or from, let's say, your stomach, stop the blood from flowing down or backwards? Well, here's your, which you think might be complicated, but actually simple, answer. valves. That's it, just one word, valves. Now, valves are basically kind of like airways which let the blood go in one direction, but it can't go back down. It's kind of like a door. If you are trying to push a door and it opens, if you go inside the room and close the door, you can't push the door to open it again, unless, of course, it's one of those type of doors. Well, valves are not those type of doors, and they prevent the blood from pushing back down or pushing back up from where they came from. Okay, now we've talked enough about blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries. Now let's talk about the mastermind of the whole circulatory system, the heart. Now, if you put your hand right on your chest, you will hear your heart thumping really, really fast. Now, you might not feel that it's fast, but in context, your heart beats 36 million times in just 1 year. That's like a lot. And when you run or when you hold your breath for a long time, your heart beats even faster. And what's your heart doing when it's beating? That's right, it's pumping blood around your body. Now, I know I said that the heart is an organ, but it's also something else. It's a really big muscle. And no, it's not those type of muscles which you might see on your biceps or your triceps. It's a type of muscle which is just really, really strong. And hearing that it beats that many times a year, you should just guess that it's really, really strong. The heart has 2 parts and 4 chambers. Now, one part is bigger than the other because it has to store more blood. And those 2 parts store 2 different types of blood, which you might already know about. They are deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. Now, there might be 2 parts, but there are 4 chambers for 2 very important reasons. The first reason is so that the blood doesn't go back to the last chamber and then out again to the veins. And the second reason is because the blood has to come into the heart, go into the next chamber, and go into the lungs to get more oxygen. So, now, I'll explain everything about these chambers because I might have made it sound a little confusing, but it's actually really easy. Okay, so, let's see. Your blood has travelled around your body and is in your artery. It's coming up to your heart and it enters the heart. This is where you have to focus. It enters your heart through the vena cava. Now, the vena cava is in the left side of your heart, but not the left as in the actual left that you see, but actually kind of the opposite. So, that's where the vena cava is, and when the blood enters, the deoxygenated blood, enters the vena cava, it's in the right atrium. The blood then makes its way to the right ventricles, and then it goes through the pulmonary artery to the lungs to get oxygen. Now, you might be thinking, but wait, the blood doesn't have any oxygen in it, so how can it go through an artery? Aren't arteries supposed to carry oxygenated blood? Well, yes, you're completely right, but the pulmonary artery is the only exception for blood to be carried as deoxygenated blood in an artery, and is the only artery in your whole body which carries deoxygenated blood. The blood then takes the oxygen from the lungs, from the air sacs, which we'll cover in a different podcast about the respiratory system, but the blood takes the oxygen from the lungs, and then it goes to the pulmonary vein, only vein in your whole body to carry oxygenated blood, and it goes to the heart, in which it goes to the left atrium, and then the left ventricle, and then it goes into the artery and around the body, carrying all of that oxygen to different, organs. Now, another question that some of you might be asking. I know how in this podcast I talked a lot about how the blood carries a lot of nutrients, carbohydrates, vitamins, proteins, but wait, we only looked at how the blood goes to the heart, goes to the lungs, gets the oxygen, and then goes to the arteries. So where in the world does it get all of these vitamins, carbohydrates stuff from? Well, if you've listened to my digestive system podcast, you would know that the small intestine absorbs all of these proteins, nutrients, vitamins, carbohydrates from the food that you eat. And, well, now, why? I also explained this, but if you haven't listened to that podcast, which you should check out after this one, well, the blood near the, small intestine, it takes all of these nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, vitamins, and it transports them around the body for all of the organs to use. And, well, that's how they get it. Now, I hope you guys have learned a lot about the circulatory system, and hopefully you'll start working as hard as your heart does every day. Don't forget to check out my other podcast about the digestive system, and please leave a review if you have enjoyed it. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.